everyone. It's lovely to have you here with us. We're currently studying the mystical book, Practicing the Presence by Joel Goldsmith, in our online book study group. And the Zoom link for the group and the recordings are in the description. In this series, Yanni and I will be discussing the spiritual principles Joel shares in this book, together with some thoughts and questions that have been asked. We'll work our way through each of the chapters, and in this video, we'll discuss the introduction and chapters 1 and 2. So Yanni, would you like to ask me the first question?
Thank you, Heather. Question number 1, here we go. Why did Joel decide to write Practicing the Presence, and how do people relate who have had similar life or spiritual experiences?
All of Joel's original books were edited by Lorraine Sinkler from talks that he gave. And I remember when I first read the introduction of this book, I got so terribly excited because I studied metaphysics and thought this book would be the one to help me manifest my goals. But really, that's not what it's about at all. Joel felt that those on the spiritual path who'd reflected inwardly would be drawn to this book. And I think people relate because they feel unfulfilled by material life and are looking for something more. He'd come to realize that understanding God was the way to a successful life. And by God, Joel meant living in awareness of ourself, our inner self, letting spirit fulfill itself rather than trying to achieve our human goals. So realizing our inner self, our invisible self, and keeping that awareness consciously alive by practicing the spiritual principles he shares brings fulfillment. And practicing the presence is the story of Joel's spiritual journey, and he wanted to share the truth that he'd come to realize. It's one of the 4 foundational books in the Infinite Way, and it introduces the concept of a presence within and helps one experience a new way of living. Doing this leads to an inner stillness, and the book explains how to live in awareness of this inner stillness throughout each day. Joel felt that especially the introduction to practicing the presence was so important. And in it, he says, and I'm going to read you a quote from the introduction. No one is going to pick up this book and read it unless it is someone who has already known quiet moments of inner reflection, someone who has been plagued by frustration, lack of success, or lack of harmony, and who has pondered long and seriously why life should be so unsatisfactory. This was who he believed would be drawn to his book.
Moving on to chapter 1, which is entitled Spiritual Consciousness. Please explain in more detail what Joel means when a question arises, how is the right answer revealed?
Okay, so to give you some context, this chapter, chapter 1, explains what spiritual consciousness is. And the next chapter, chapter 2, is how to attain the realization of it, i.e. by relying on an inner power rather than by taking thought. So faith in the infinite invisible, as Joel called it spirit infinite invisible. Faith deepens when you practice it and when you see that it works and how it works. It's about seeing how needs are met compared to putting faith, as we do humanly, in persons or things. So to answer your question, Yanni, let's look at the principles shared in this chapter. Joel writes, our consciousness is the substance of our world. This is hugely important, so important that I'm going to say it again. Our consciousness is the substance of our world. This means we can never lose anything that we are, because we are our consciousness. And our consciousness is the only law, the only substance, the only power cause and activity that ever exists. He also wrote, "Every issue of life is determined not by external conditions and things, but by our consciousness." So we learn to practice being still and listening within, having an expectant attitude, developed through meditation, which creates a vacuum into which consciousness rushes all the things we have need of. And then you know it's the right answer, because it didn't appear by taking thought, although it may come as an inner prompting. In this chapter, Joel was very clear that practicing the presence is an inner discipline, a day by day, an hour by hour activity that develops into a growing recognition and experience of our infinite invisible self that eventually becomes continuous as we live in conscious awareness of it. And I think he captures this by writing, I'm going to read you a final quote, "The degree of spiritual consciousness which we attain can be measured by the extent to which we relinquish our dependence on the external world of form and place our faith and confidence in something greater than ourselves, in the infinite invisible, which can surmount any and every obstacle."
And moving on to the final question. Our next question relates to chapter 2, which is entitled Demonstrate God. And in it, it tells us that the infinite way life knows no limitation. Please explain that more.
So this is the how. An important principle in the infinite way is that we don't seek for anything other than God. I.e., we don't seek for anything other than the realization of our own consciousness, because there is no God and. There's no companionship, no health, no supply and our consciousness. There's no me and my body. There's no me and my world. There's just our own consciousness. We don't seek health, we don't try to get it, because we are it. We're not seeking something from God in the infinite way, we're living in awareness of it. And there's no limitations in God fulfillment, because all that ever is here now. There's only the fullness of consciousness here now, eternally present. It's always available. We just have to be aware of it and then rest in it. When we understand this, it's enormously liberating, because it means we no longer have to be concerned about appearances in the human world. So the practice is resting within and watching inwardly as our inner light radiates through us. Perhaps feeling it as a welling up of joy, a click as Joel called it, pulsing, a spiraling, etc. There are infinite ways to experience self. And we don't have to try or to manipulate. Demonstration in the infinite way is the consciousness of ourself. So as Joel says, meeting God face to face is the end of the road. There is nothing more to be desired.
Thank you very much for sharing, and let's end with a short meditation.